Okay, so welcome everybody to the second alumni nurture sessions. Great to have you here, and really super excited to have our amazing guest speaker, Dr. Anna Semens, who is the Global Head of Customer Insight and Data over at the North Technology Group. I'm really excited to have you here, Anna, and I know previously we've worked together over, I think, maybe 4 years now, when you were previously at Formula E, and I know that you've done the Nurture programme and that you are excited to join it again this summer, which is amazing. So just a little recap, a little bit about you, and I was reading obviously your bio and you know, the amazing kind of brands that you've worked on, household brands, and obviously deeply interested in sport. And I know that we've talked about how you're very sporty, and you're also, you know, a classic violinist, and I'm kind of like, you know, is there no end to your talents? So it's really super exciting to have you on board, and I'm kind of quite amazed at how you get to juggle everything and be a fantastic, you know, data scientist as well. And I know what I've always found is that you're really human. I sound a bit odd, but you always had time to spend with me and helping me develop the programme, and always trying to get the best out of the students that you've had work with you. So I would really wanted to say before we start, you know, thank you so much for doing that. And it's been brilliant working with you to date. And super excited to see this presentation and ask you some questions throughout. And then obviously at the end, we will have time for a Q&A from the audience. So I am your host this evening, and my name is Lucy Lynch, and I am Head of Graduate Partnerships at Eden Smith. So over to you, Anna.
Thank you, Lucy. I always get worried when people give me this great introduction that I'm going to be disappointed in the presentation. So fingers crossed. What I'm going to start with saying is that I'm Anna. I lead Insight and Analytics at North. Sadly, this is not me in the picture. So I wish I could kite surf, and it's on my list of things to do. So as somebody who loves sports, obviously I want to be able to do this. But every time I've said to the guys that they should take me out, they've kind of looked at me and gone, we don't have that level of insurance. So I'm guessing that I just don't quite look like I'm going to be up to it. But it's next on my list of challenges.
Fantastic.
So Lucy's asked me to talk a little bit about me. So I'm not going to dwell on this too long, but I thought what I could do is run through my career so far. I started out as an economist, so that was my degree. And I did a PhD in econometrics. So I was always interested in answering questions using data. So basically, I originally went to work as a consultant in a consultancy company. And it was kind of using data, but it was more data to support decisions than actually using it to make decisions. So it was kind of like find the data that backs up the point that we want to go down anyway. But what I really learned in that was how important it is to like, I suppose those human elements, like how important it is to take what you've learned from a data perspective and translate it into something that's actually going to work in a business context. Mm-hmm. So when I came to do my PhD, I had all these questions about why footballers transfer for the amount of money that they do. So it was like late noughties, mid to late noughties, and there were quite a lot of football clubs that were dangerously close to going bust. And part of the problem for them was that they were signing players and paying way too much. And I just didn't understand from a business perspective why they would do that. So you probably realise that it's not easy to get transfer and wage data for players. But I was incredibly lucky that I got enough to be able to build some regression models. So essentially, my PhD was mapping what people had what clubs had spent to sign a player, mapped against their expected value on the pitch. Mm-hmm. So it was looking at marginal revenue product and what do we think they're going to contribute to this team. And what we really found is that there was a big gap between the price that you would pay under perfect competition and the prices that were actually being paid. So it took me down a whole route of agents and the role that they play in matching teams, and whether or not there's some preferential treatment that makes it absolutely not perfect competition. And is that a good or a bad thing for the industry in general? So I did that, and as I say, I just wanted to answer more questions, and I was super interested in working in sport. But at the time, there weren't many clubs that particularly wanted to employ you to do that. So I got a job working in Switzerland with a company that valued TV and media rights and sponsorship rights as well. So they collected loads and loads of data on the value of, so for example, how much have Standard Chartered paid to be on the front of Liverpool shirt, or how much do the Emirates pay to have Arsenal Stadium, or anything like that. So what we used to do was work with lots of brands and rights holders to see how much they could expect to pay for a certain sponsorship, and the same thing for TV rights. So whenever the World Cup's on, or a big Olympics or anything like that, broadcasters will compete with each other to have the rights to basically show races or show events, and those broadcasters have to make a decision on how much they're willing to spend to acquire the rights. And again, I started out in a time where like rights fees were just escalating really, really quickly, and it was hard to tell in advance whether or not you were going to get that money back. So we started to build models to see whether or not that was going to happen. So that was my first job. I then diverted to being back in academia. So I loved working with different rights holders, but the kind of data work that I was doing was not really that sophisticated, and I kind of wanted to have more of a challenge, and I thought academia might be more rigorous, and I kind of went back into doing that. But what I'd learnt in the previous jobs is that you could actually generate quite a lot of revenue for the university from doing similar consulting work, but possibly more analytical. So I did 4 years working in universities, running projects for big brands. So we worked with MasterCard, and I got to travel a lot with them. So we worked on the Rugby World Cup and the Six Nations, Tri-Nations, and also working for places like the European Commission. So at the time, the UEFA had introduced a rule on homegrown players. So it basically limited the number of foreign players that you could have in your team if you were playing in UEFA competitions. The European Commission were concerned about whether or not the rule was legal. And if it was legal, was it proportionate? So was there a better rule that could have been in place that would have basically given you the same outcome? So what we had to do with that was take all of the data that we had from clubs that had played in UEFA competitions and clubs that hadn't, to see whether or not the rule itself as an intervention had distorted the market or not. So that was like really, really complex data, but it was all about the interpretation of it. So ultimately, had this been a good or a bad thing for the sport? So sorry. So it did those things.
Sorry, Alan, sorry.
No, it's okay. And then I kind of changed tack again. So I'd gone from being in academia to thinking that there were loads and loads of questions that we could answer, but we just didn't have the data to be able to do them. So I went to work for a media agency, and that's where I started to work with big brands. So from like writing academic journal articles and things like that in econometrics papers, always dreaming of these amazing data sets that I could use that were more real life. I started at Havas, and the first thing that came across my desk was the negotiations for EE to sponsor Wembley. And they basically wanted to know exactly how much they were going to get out of doing it. So they didn't want to make it as a vanity decision. It was very much like, what's the return on investment going to be? And that kind of set the scene for everything else that I did at Havas. It was a lot of work to help brands make sure that they were getting value from the work that they did.
Okay.
So,
and one of the questions that I wanted to ask you, sorry, previously, was that How did it feel like as a woman in a really male dominated kind of like a sports industry then? How did that feel? What were the kind of what was that like?
It was mixed. So working with football clubs, I actually found that possibly because it was unexpected that a woman was doing the kind of things that I would do. People were sometimes less guarded. So I made the kind of the comment about it being really difficult to get data. I think that in some ways I was probably underestimated. So people would look at it and go, what you going to do with it? It's a big deal. Let's share this. So in some ways it worked in my favor. In other ways, like I said this before, Lucy, but I went to present as a keynote speaker at a conference, and I was presenting on media rights, and it was like I'd done some pretty big deals in that kind of area. And I turned up at the conference and asked for directions and was shown to the kitchen, because the immediate assumption was that I was there to waitress, because I couldn't possibly be there to speak because I was a woman. So I think they're sort of either ends of the spectrum. What I've found generally is that working in data, there's actually not as much bias as you might expect. Working in sport is a bit different, and I think you sort of got to prove your worth. But I would say that now in data, it is fairly equal opportunities, and people who are good at their job are just good at their job. So I think the world's changed a bit recently, and I think sport has changed a lot. Yeah. And I certainly don't get the same kind of
treatment.
No.
Well, that's good to hear anyway. And I mean, obviously we have a little chuckle about things like that, but it is difficult to censor yourself, right? And then you just think that you've got all this experience and you know what you're doing, but just because of your gender, somebody will not believe that that's what you're all about, which is a great shame. So thanks for sharing that.
It's okay. So briefly back to my career. So after the media agencies, I decided that I wanted to go and work for a rights holder. I went to work for Formula E. At the time, they were 2 or 3 years old, so it was the very beginning of a new sport, and they managed to generate a lot of revenue already for sponsorship, but they hadn't necessarily been able to demonstrate what value it was delivering back to brands. And also they've managed to get like millions of people tuning into the broadcast product, but they didn't know anything about those people. So growing a sport is actually much harder than working in an e-com business, because when you're in e-com business, you've got customers and you have a record of what they've bought, and you know how you've engaged with them, and you can then talk to them in a way that they want to be spoken to. With sport, you can't do that, because you actually have no direct relationship necessarily with the people who are watching. So you're sort of trying to pick up data clues from online and from third-party data that help you to understand who your own fan base are. So we did a lot of work on the digital ecosystem, saying what can we do and what can we put in place to give us those data points so that we know who our fans are. And then 6 months ago, I joined North, which is where I am now. So if anybody in the audience sales, you've probably heard of North Sales. If you don't, and you don't kite surf or anything like that, and you're not from Italy, you might not have heard of the brand. I hadn't when I joined, or before I joined. But what I've learned is that they're an amazing set of companies that are united by the ocean. So North started in the 50s, and it was started by a sailor, Lowell North, who he was an engineer and he wanted to build better sails. So he used data and technology and cutting edge science to innovate and make different shapes and just basically do things differently. So everything was the ground to test things on. Over the years, we've acquired a lot of other companies. So some that are directly related to masts and sailing and the products that go on around that. And others that are kind of adjacent, that are in the action sports realm. So North Action Sports Group focuses on things like kiteboards. Mystic is a big wetsuit brand. Edgewater's power boats. And we also have a fashion apparel label, which is tied to the North Sails brand as well. So I'm going to speed up a bit because I'm aware of time. But what really attracted me to North and why I'm showing this slide is because when I joined, I saw the company's vision and its mission, and it was to chart our own course, look beyond the horizon and give back to the ocean. And for me, these are really important things that translated through to data as well. So what I take from this is be bold. We're not afraid to take risks. So if we see something working in another industry that we think might work, we can absolutely run the models on it and do some predictions and see if it's going to work. And it doesn't matter if nobody's ever done it before and everybody thinks that it's not going to work. Like it's an open book, and it's absolutely encouraged to do that. The second thing is the solutions that are really obvious are probably not the ones that are going to take us very far. So sometimes you have to just, I suppose, step outside of your comfort zone. And from a data perspective, that might be look at different techniques and maybe look in a different place for the data, because sometimes, you know, the things that are obvious just like will carry on to give us the market share that we've got. The things that we can innovate on will be the ones that take us further. And then finally, be responsible. So we believe in giving back to the ocean, because that, like, if we didn't have the ocean, we wouldn't have jobs and we couldn't enjoy ourselves and do so many other things. So like for the company, it's about how are we sustainable in the materials that we use and in the way that we package things, the way that we travel. From a data perspective, I think it's about respecting the people whose data you're collecting.
Yeah.
So we can't just use data, you know, like some people don't know they've given you their data when they have. So it doesn't feel right to then use it to try and squeeze more money out of them. So I think we're very responsible in the way that we respond to our customers and our potential customers, and that kind of underpins it all.
And how typically, Krista, do customers respond to having their data collected?
I think it's expected now. So I would say that in the last 10 years, things have changed a lot. So we're now in like a Netflix culture or an Amazon culture where people understand that if they share data, they're going to get better recommendations. It's going to save them time. It's going to save them energy. And it's almost this value trade-off. So I think that as long as you're delivering value from taking that data, then people are way more accepting of doing it. But I heard something interesting the other week where somebody was talking about the difference between first-party data and zero-party data.
Yeah.
Where first-party data is data that has been given to you from your customers. So, for example, if somebody fills in a credit check before they buy something, you're going to have their date of birth. What would then be weird is to use that date of birth to send them a gift on their birthday. So quite often you kind of like you've accidentally signed up to something, then suddenly on your birthday they send you all these offers for you to spend more money, and that just seems a little bit odd. So the zero-party data would be asking somebody when they sign up to your newsletter what their birthday is so that you can send them a birthday treat. And I think what we're seeing a lot of now is people going, hold on a minute, I might have given you that data, but I didn't want you to use it in that way. Okay. So I think when we're building campaigns and when we're looking at, you know, I think the thing is there are so many data points right now that you can know so much about people, and it can be intrusive. And there's got to be a really good balance between taking the data and working out what you can deliver and going too far. Yeah. So I think it's a fine line that, you know, everybody's grappling with right now, but hopefully we've struck a balance. Maybe
that's good. Yeah, and obviously you're responsible because everything that you care about, right, is all about giving back and making sure you're maintaining standards and and good relationships, because you want to carry on, right, with your reputation and carry on innovating, and you can only do that with a good customer base that's going to keep giving back, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we check a lot. We do a lot of work. The data team does a lot of work to see the impact. So if, for example, like how frequently should we send emails? And we segment based on, like, we have a frequency policy. So we segment based on people who are super engaged and can take 2 emails a week, or who aren't that engaged and are probably going to only want one, once every 3 months. And it's about like understanding the preferences, because there's no point in spamming people. Like it's not going to make you get any more sales.
Exactly. My inbox is full of spam and don't even look at it anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. I have an inbox that's purely for spam. So when I have to sign up for something, it goes into the junk.
It goes into that.
Yeah, and I just don't open it. So I'm the worst person to do this as a job, because I just don't respond.
Excellent.
So we tend to use data for 3 things, really. The first one is so I'll step back a bit. I see data as a bit of a virtuous circle and how you use it. So we used to talk a lot about sometimes there's too much data and you don't have a data lake, you have a data swamp, and you can't get through it and you don't know what to do with it. And there's just so much that you can't clean it and you actually don't really get very much value.
Yeah.
So what I've tried to do is pare it back and say, like, there are ways that we use the data. And if we're not going to get one of these things from it, then we've got to question why we bother, why we want to collect it. So the first one is to make strategic choices. So when you're at the start of anything, it's always nice to be able to check and see what value you're going to get. And like this could be things like just questions from this week. With one of our clothing brands, we're looking at new markets. So we used loads of data from across the group to say, where do we think the propensity to convert is highest for that clothing brand. And similarly, if we have a new product launch, we would do the same thing, and it's all based on testing and data. And so basically, when we make an impact in a new area, we've got a fair chance of getting it right.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed. So I think that's the first use for data. So at the very beginning, when you're making your decisions, like, back it up. Second is to track how you're performing. So when you've got KPIs that have been set, like, are you delivering against them? And this is where it's become really, really important to have things in close to real time, because it's not really very helpful to evaluate a program at the end of it. Like, yes, you can learn what you're going to do next time, but you can, and I don't think you can get the full results as you're going ever, but you can get enough now in dashboards and in models that you've already got set up, so you can see the value. So like when I first started at Havas, we would run marketing mix models for our clients, but we probably didn't have the results of them for about 3 months after the campaign had finished, because by the time you've collected the data and you've got a period to compare it to, it's almost like you've already done the second campaign, and you've wasted that money all over again if it didn't work. Whereas now we've got tools in-house that we can essentially see the impact of every action that we do. So every bit of marketing that goes out, we know the revenue value that it's delivered. So, and that's due to a change in customer behaviour and the fact that a lot of things are digital now. Yeah. But it's also just down to how quickly machine learning's been adopted to enable, like, you almost know the answer before you start it. So
yeah,
you're literally just feeding data into models to get the answer out the other end as soon as you can. And that's when it's essential for, like, the teams internally to understand that data and to be able to do something with it. So if you're spending marketing budget on an advertising campaign that doesn't look like it's working, it's super important just to be able to say it to the teams, like, this isn't going that well, and for them to be able to stop it or change it or pivot or use a different creative or whatever else. So 3 different kinds of data. So if they're the steps that we go through when we use data, there's also lots of different ways to collect it and things that we talk about. So the first one is sort of related to that strategic point for us, and it's about how we develop products. There's a video on YouTube that if anybody wants to see what we do at North and how we take it from race to implementing it into the sales that we design for cruising or for other uses, so not race products. You can watch the video, and it basically shows the America's Cup teams using our sales and how we take the measurements and can respond to the way those sales move, and take all the data back and use it for product development. Wow. And the way that that's changed over the past 20 years is just huge. So the way that we can now put sensors into a sale that we sell to a normal person.
Yeah.
Like, actually, there's a really cool product where if you buy one of our sales and you go out and you're sailing in your boat with it, you can have an app, and the app is taking the data from the sales and telling you exactly how to pivot them or move them. So just really small changes.
Wow,
that'll make
that's
you go really
incredible.
quickly. And like the idea of being able to do that, like a normal person sitting in a boat with an app on the phone to
it's almost like an online like YouTube tutorial to make you sail better, right? Like on the go.
Yeah, sort of. I mean, it literally, you stand or you sit on your board. It tracks your sail, so you're holding where your sail is, and it tells you how to change it. Wow. And what you should do, because it's, I mean, as somebody who's not a sailor, it appears to be, like, to me, very difficult to get all of this stuff right without years of practice. But
well, we should do it. We should test drive it, Anna. And
yeah.
Go somewhere exotic and we'll test drive it.
I'm always up for that.
So talking about historical data, though, do you think that is more or less important, kind of, in the COVID era? Because when we're talking about that, I'm just really interested about that historical data and what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, so I think it's probably less important, sadly, because I think, like, the world changed during COVID. Mm-hmm. It changed for our business at the time. So when COVID hit, I was working for Formula E, and I think we had a race in Marrakesh. And everybody got back from Marrakesh, and then we didn't race again for like 8 months, maybe longer. And that was it. Like, everything changed. And suddenly overnight, we went from being a racing series where we tried to engage with people around a race weekend to not having that engagement point. So we had to work really hard to find a way to bring our audience back. So because we'd committed to delivering this value to our sponsors, but we didn't have that race to showcase them anymore. So yeah, and as I said in the beginning, we didn't have those direct touch points. So if we weren't on TV and we weren't in the news, it was kind of like, oh, where's this value going to come from? We had like ABB were the headline partner, and Hugo Boss and all sorts of others who expected their logo to be shown. Yeah. So we immediately had to go, okay, well, what else can we do? And we started a gaming product, a gaming series. And actually data played quite a big role in how this played out, because everybody at the time was starting to do gaming, because it was like, okay, every sport has stopped. There's got to be a way to fill this time. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we looked at it, and like the data said the obvious thing: do a gaming series. Esports is really big at this point, and it's got a massive market size. But we had to try and work out, how do we stand out in all of this? Mm-hmm. And F1 were doing it, and they had a bigger fan base, and they already had some TV deals where it was going to be shown. And we sort of looked at it and went, well, what can our point of difference be? And the data showed that what people were really interested in was seeing our drivers do something. Okay. So we took the decision to ship a sim rig, so like a racing sim, to every one of our drivers, no matter where they'd gone into lockdown. And some of them were like in the wilds of New Zealand, like literally. So DHL were one of our partners, and they were shipping these massive sim rigs to people's houses, the drivers' houses. And all of our drivers agreed to compete in this sim racing game. So we did that, and we set it up as a series, and that actually like started to change the way our audience came in and everything else. So I think data at that point showed us that there was a change, and we had to do something differently. For North, it's a bit different. So the big change, I think, is the way that people engage with brands. So people don't, like, the 9 to 5 doesn't really exist anymore. So the normal way that people behave and buy things. So if you think about us as an apparel brand, ordinarily there would have been spikes after work, possibly on the way to work, and maybe on lunchtime. Whereas now things are a bit more relaxed, and people, you know, engage with our brand at totally different times. And what we found for the Salem brand in particular is that we need to be more responsive. So because people aren't even working from home anymore. Sorry, not by working from home, I mean their own house. So there's a great stat that like a large proportion of Airbnb rooms are now being booked for more than a month. And that's because people are taking like a 3-month break and going and working in Madrid or some other cool city. So it's become like time zone goes out of the window. And the way that we have to respond to our customers is to acknowledge that and be available. So we have like, we're still doing the work mapping the customer journeys to say, like, what do we really need to serve people the things that they want now. And I think, again, personalization comes into it a lot, because people are maybe less patient. So in the past, people sort of expected things to take a while and things to not be that easy, because that's the way it had always been. Whereas I think in a post-COVID world, there's been this fundamental change where the norm is not acceptable anymore. And for a brand, like, you have to perform, or else somebody, like, there's somewhere else that you can go. So I think, like, what we find is that, and actually this sort of talks to the difference between having a hypothesis before you run a data model, or running a model and seeing what it shows you. We found that, like, things changed. So in COVID, things changed. More people went sailing. So we saw that our sales actually increased. We had a really good year because people had time to go out and do things. But they didn't buy things in the way that they had done previously. So if we just run the old data and use the old models, we'd have got absolutely the wrong insight at the end, because, like, there's never a more true point than correlation doesn't equal causation. And that's what we've been really careful with. So yeah, we still use the data that we collected pre-COVID, but it's got to be very carefully interpreted.
Okay. Yeah.
Cool. Moving on. So the second kinds of data that we collect are about our audience. So audience in this case are the people who may see our brand, may know about us, may even be interested, but we haven't got any direct relationship with them yet. So we can't collect, we don't have their names and addresses. We may have some data on them because they visited our website, but we certainly don't know them. And what's really important for us is trying to understand at a kind of an aggregate level how our products would resonate with different groups. So we create target audience segments, and we do that through consumer research, through data matching with big data vendors. And we might have some first party data that we would match that against. So we'd start and build up a picture of who these people are and what they might want to buy, with the aim of having more targeted advertising. So in the past, there was a general term for advertising can be spray and pray. So and I think there's a big shift away from that.
Yeah.
So every brand now is having a look to say, like, they don't want to spend a fortune to maybe hit the right people. It's about how much can we understand about the people that we know who would be interested. So it's about, like, if you're going to put ads online, put them in a place that can be seen, and it's data that so be seen by the right people, and it's data that tells us that, so we can track people and see their user journeys even if we don't know them. We do loads of work, so looking at our data and developing clusters, so seeing the common elements that people care about to then build personas. And it's always been an interesting one to me. So when I worked in an agency, we used to do loads of customer segmentations, and the brand would give us their data. We would sit in our agency, create these segmentations, make it look really pretty, and give them really nice names. So we'd label each cluster with a cool name that was probably created by the creative director because it sounded better, and then feed them back into the business. And then I went on the other side and said, why can't we do this in-house? And everybody basically said, because, you know, you can do this in-house, but it just probably won't land as well unless it's like it has those pretty graphics and it has those cool names and things like that. So I kind of, like, all of my data science teams, I sort of take them out of what they would normally do, so they can all run k-means, right? It's fairly simple, and all get to the right answers. But actually, for it to land in the business, it's about how you present that data onwards. And I think that's been, like, a really important thing for us, building teams that understand the business need and can feed it back in. And
absolutely, because if you don't know it internally, right, how can you broadcast it externally, right? And everyone is a cheerleader for the business, right? So that building that deeper understanding internally is only going to make your brand stronger. I mean, that's my understanding. So what big innovations have you worked on then?
So I think I guess the biggest one in recent years has been at Formula E. So we worked a lot on the Gen 3 car. So if anyone follows Formula E from the beginning, you would see that in the first few years, there was basically a stop in the middle of the race where the driver would jump out of his car because he was at the end of the range and jump into a new car and continue to drive. So it's that's changed a lot now. So that was Gen 1. In the Gen 2 car, like, cars and EV tech had developed to a point where we didn't need to have that stop in the middle, so you could complete the race in just one car, which was brilliant. But it was still a 45-minute race, so it's not that long. But there were lots of reasons why it was 45 minutes, and it wasn't necessarily because of range. It was more like, how do you build a product that works for the current day? So it's difficult to sit down and watch a 3-hour race. It takes up your whole afternoon. Watching for 45 minutes is a way easier way to build a fan base. So anyway, with the car, what we did a lot of was take all of the data, so from telemetry sensors in the car, to measure what was possible. So there were so many things that went from the race car that we learned from, like, cooling systems, or how you could do regen, so with the energy in the car, that then ultimately came straight back onto the road cars, because the development between the cars that are racing in the series, like, they're all in it because they're developing EV cars and selling them to customers. So it was amazing to see some of the things that had been developed in Formula E moving across to being sold on a forecourt that just would not have been possible 5 years ago, never mind, like, 10 years ago. So those kinds of things are great. Other things were, we did loads and loads of work in understanding how audiences respond to certain things. So we did a really cool neuroscience project where we basically had people watch races, and we could tell, like, we had sensors on people, so you could tell like when their heart rate changed, when they got excited, when they were bored, when anything else happened. And you'd see the response. We used a really cool agency to do it as well. And we collected the data on that, and we could see all of the lines from what was going on in the race, how people felt about it when they watched it. And then we overlaid the data from digital, so we could see what made people talk. And then we also had the data from broadcast, so we could see when people were dropping out of the race. So we had minute by minute how many people watched. So we did things like look at, if there's a safety car, does that make people more excited or less excited? Or if there's a yellow flag or a red flag, or things like that. And then we used the insights that we found from that to start developing the product for what it's going to look like in the next. So it'll be like the next season, which hasn't started yet. So
yeah,
like that was a really cool thing to genuinely build the sport and put new things into it. So we did a thing called attack mode, which is basically where you get a car that leaves the racing line to charge, get an extra few volts of energy that makes you go faster, and probably could allow you to overtake. So depending on how it was taken. But all of those kind of things were amazingly good ideas, but we could also use the data to build a model to see how it would impact. So before you actually put a change like that on a race course, like you should run a simulation.
Yeah.
And it can just say like, is this going to be a material impact, or is this just like a gimmick?
Right.
So I think those kind of things, like being able to run those models, is super exciting. And there aren't many opportunities to do that. So
no, amazing. So when you said the attack car, I was like imagining like the Fast and Furious, right? Like, you know, kind of like whizzing down there. It's like really exciting, Anna.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and again, like it all ties back. You've got to link the product and the audience together. If you are in isolation, you can get like to a certain point. But what was really important for us is to say, like, we've got what's going on in the race, we've got what's going on with the audience. What's the real impact? Because even if we could see that people were excited by something or bored by something, did it actually make them turn off? Or did it make them go online and be super excited about it? Like this, I think when you're at the point of trying to generate an audience and make people excited, you sort of need that community behind it as well. And especially because of how much social and digital engagement is important now, it was kind of like it was always worth tracking what was going on in response. And that's something that we just, like, we're in such a good environment now that we can take data that's being posted on Twitter and say, like, the same for North, really, like any conversations that are happening around our brand or happening around the America's Cup or any other event. King of the Air for kiteboarding is a big one for us. Like we can see like how people are talking about us and what it means to them, and that just gives us cues. And if we're smart about noticing what those signals are, we can absolutely bring more people into our audience. And I think the next slide I've got here is one that I've stolen from InCrowd, who are a consultancy company who did some work for us in the past. And they had this really cool view of, we've got loads of people who are essentially our audience that we just talked about, that are, you know, they're interested in our product, but we've got no idea who they are. So they could be the people who buy something in a store, but we don't have a direct relationship with, or people who view our ads, but we don't know who they are and how they respond. So they're at the very top, and they're our unknown potential customers. And they're the biggest group of people that you could really bring through. And the more you go through the funnel, the more likely it is that we're going to get conversions. So the more and the things on the right are really about like, what's your journey and how can you engage those people? How do you get more touch points? Like, what's the omni-channel view? And how do you do it? Because we know that as soon as we get people to, like, as soon as we start to know who those customers are, the chances are that we can show them products that they want to buy and bring them back. So it's much, much easier to keep a customer that you've already got than to go out and find a new one. I think it's like 7 times more expensive to find a new customer than keep one that you already have. So it's really important for us from a data perspective to map each of these levels and know our conversion rates from one to the next and how much it's worth. Because like ultimately, when we start to look at our customer data, what we don't want to do is spend so much money attracting a customer that ultimately we're not going to get that revenue back. So return on ad spend is really important as a metric, and it's something that we track a lot. But what we're trying to do is say, well, what's the lifetime value of a customer? And it might be expensive to bring them in and tell them about us, but if in the long term it's going to be worth it, then of course you make your investment there. But I've seen a lot of businesses where, you know, the return on ad spend, yeah, you make a little bit more, but you've worked so hard to try and bring them in that it's just like mistargeted. Yeah. So I think that's where it's important.
Okay. To do that. And what are the kind of like one of the biggest things that you've had to do as a brand to respond to the changing environment post-COVID?
So I think it is about building that digital engagement and the sort of the expectation of omni-channel. So again, like during COVID, there were only certain times that people would do things. And I think the response that was needed to like if it wants to do something, they probably want to do it straight away. So there's less time, I suppose, a timeline. But also I think people are like, and maybe this is a COVID thing, maybe it's not. I think it's probably just a time thing. But what we find and what a lot of businesses find is that you can see the customer journey online, and you've got somebody who frequently comes to your website, might even put something in the trolley. So you and in the back end of this, you can basically see this person, and the immediate response would be, when they don't convert, send them an email and get them to come back in. So like people who drop out of the funnel, try and put them back in. But what we see now is that the customer journey could well be that they've done all of their research online and they've dropped out, but they've gone and bought it in a store. So it's and I guess like that was a bit different over COVID as well, because that didn't really happen so much. People weren't going out and shopping. But now I think we're returning to it. We've got to be more careful. So like we don't want to send somebody an email who's just left our store and has the product in their hand. They could be wearing it when they receive our email. That just makes us look stupid. So it's about like how do we make sure that we know what's going on, and we've got to be super mindful that behavior is changing and respond to that. I think. Okay. It's hard. It's really hard.
Yeah, a challenge.
Yeah, so the final kind of data is really customer data, which is your first party data or zero party data that you collect yourself. And I think the biggest use that we have for this is really building those customer journeys. So all the things that we just talked about, what's important for a brand to do is to have those omni-channel things linked up. So we're spending a lot of time at the moment just putting in place the infrastructure to be able to do this. And what we want to do is understand like how our behavior makes people feel and act. And working with brands like Coca-Cola, we used to do loads and loads of work on how people create memories. And it was very much like, how does the product need to fit into the way that people form memories, so that ultimately the next time something really good happens, there'll be a link with how they felt at that time, and they will go and buy a Coke. So to cut a very, very complicated story short, that is the link. And I think it kind of stands all the time. Like, brands need to be associated with the happy memories and the things that people want to do. So we do loads of work to test, what makes people get a good response. And it's not all about sales. It's about being a cool brand, especially in the sports that we're in. Like, we're into kite surfing, we're into wakeboarding. These are actually people. Pictures of some of the people in the New Zealand office. And what really struck me when I joined North was I spoke to the guys in New Zealand, and they basically said, like, they work incredibly hard, but they were like, yeah, we're 15 minutes from a really, really good surfing beach. So if the wind comes,
like, they're off.
We're gone. Don't expect us to show the rain. And I think, like, why we as a company do really good product design and understand our customers is because, like, everybody sort of buys into that. And we all take the products out and test them and look at them. Some people are better than me, most people are better than me. But the intent is there.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
And I think, like, what we're constantly doing is trying to get a real-time data feed on what that response is. So we might look at social media, and the kind of tools that we use now can recognize what's in a video. So instead of somebody having to watch a video and say, okay, there was a trick in the first 3 seconds, you would use AI, and then you can detect what happened. And then you can see how well that performed. So you then start to say, okay, well, if we're doing that, we know what videos work and what videos don't. And it doesn't take any creativity away, because if you just have a formulaic video, it's probably not going to work. If you have the building blocks to make a super creative video, but based on the things that we know, then it works really well. So our creative teams, like, use a lot of insight around how to build cool stuff that people want to watch, and that's really good for building our brand, and it makes people feel good, and that's how we want to be associated. That's what we want people to think about when they think about any of our products, how they felt when they were out, like, kiteboarding or anything else. And we try and put all of that into dashboards. So again, like, going back to our point, that was, we do all this research, but we have to make it presentable. It's about understanding what the other people that you're working with want to see, because information overload's never a good thing, and people just be totally turned off. I think as well, like, I've learned that not everybody means the same thing when they ask for a dashboard. So like, firstly, I presume that everybody who asked for a dashboard wanted an all singing, all dancing view of what's going on right now, when actually, not this CEO, he probably does want that, but an old CEO actually just wanted a PowerPoint slide at the end of the week to tell him what was going on, but he called it a dashboard, and we built him a dashboard and wasted a ton of time and a lot of energy. So, like, it's super important to just understand what people want to see.
No, definitely. We had a couple of questions, Anna, and I just wondered if I could just, we had a question from Matt Small, and he'd asked, how have recent events impacted your supply chain, and how has data helped?
Yeah, good question. They have impacted the supply chain, obviously. How's data helped? Well, it helps us to plan for the future. So I think there's been, and I guess, talking about Formula E as much as North, and I think any brand really, there's a greater focus on how the supply chain works, and automating elements of it that we can, and maybe changing production in places. So Formula E is a great example. We had all of our kit to put on the race from a tech perspective got stuck in Mexico during COVID and we couldn't get it out. So I think it was Mexico, possibly Spain. I'm fairly sure it was Mexico. But it was basically in the wrong place. We couldn't do anything about it because there was just no movement. So there were some things that had to change in terms of not all of the kit can be in the same place at once, and maybe we need more. And there were lots of reasons why we took decisions at Formula E that were more about sustainability as well. But there was a decision taken that we used to fly things around, which is obviously not very good for your carbon footprint.
Yeah.
And we decided to ship things. But if you're shipping things, it's so much slower. So you probably need twice the amount so that things can be in different places. And we were really lucky with Formula E that when we did start racing again, we actually could get everything, but there were concerns. At North, there was shortages in lots of areas. So I think it's made us reevaluate like the buy-in cycles and how our factories work. So I think a lot of brands are looking at that and saying, how can we be more efficient and how can we, like, I mean, actually a related point is, if you've got all this data and it tells you how people are reacting to your products, then you have to be able to change the products mid-season. So you see lots of, there's a big difference in fashion brands and how they deal with this, because some brands like can get products out of the factories very quickly, in which case they can order fewer and decide to dial up and down the products that work. So data science becomes like integral to that, because they, like, week to week almost, they can say, okay, this is how we want to order, this is what we want to do according to what sells. And other brands have found that, you know, they have a much longer lead time, so they've got to make their bets at the beginning, and those brands have to look at it and say, well, based on historic data, what do we think is going to work, which may or may not be true, and you just kind of, you take a bet on it. So it's definitely had an impact.
Brilliant. And my last question, because we literally have, I think, 2 minutes. Amy Edwards has asked, recent research suggests that the pandemic has increased the gender gap, and she'd be really interested to hear your views.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. But I also think that it depends. It really depends. I think there are opportunities. There are probably more opportunities for women now with people not having to go into an office all the time. So things like childcare can at times be easier, but also there's the balance that maybe it's harder because, you know, you're working from home, which doesn't give you any peace and quiet to get things done. So I think it's going to be really interesting how companies respond. And, you know, the pandemic's been hard for everyone, irrespective of gender. And I think there's got to be some recognition in the way that people start to go back to whatever normal life is, that, you know, maybe things that we thought had reversed in terms of gaps haven't, and we've actually stepped back a bit. So there are things that need to be looked at, but I think every company is dealing with it in a different way. And I know that, you know, we certainly are looking at it and seeing what impact it's had. I also think that in terms of choosing who you work for, questions like that are super important, because probably the places that haven't addressed it maybe aren't where you want to be. So
That's a good point. We're probably in our last 30 seconds, Anna. So
well, this is the last slide and I have very little to say on it. So all I want to do is just, like, as I said at the beginning, this is all about, like, how does data deliver value for a business? So 3 things to leave with you. The first one, like, when you're thinking about the data that you look at and the things that you do, it's probably going to be well received if it's going to help to drive efficiency and focus on the right things. If it generates more money, then all the better. And just don't drown in the data. Like, make sure that you have a roadmap and you know what you're actually doing with it, and just collect the things that you need. And that's me done.
Oh, amazing. Thank you so much, Anna. It's been absolutely a pleasure to listen to you and learn more about North and your journey with them. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for listening.
Thank you.